The camera shutter clicked 3 times before Sophia Bennett realized her hands were shaking. She lowered the lens and stared at the photograph on the tiny screen, a street vendor laughing with a customer, their faces bright under the glow of golden streetlights. Simple moments like these were what she lived for, the honest fragments of life that most people rushed past without seeing. At 23, Sophia had built her world carefully around things she could control. Her second-hand camera. Her shift at the bookstore on Fifth Avenue. Her small studio apartment that smelled like lavender and old pages. She had never been in love, never let anyone close enough to see the careful walls she maintained around her heart. After watching her mother leave when she was 12, choosing a new life over their family, Sophia learned that trust was a luxury she could not afford. Owen Rivers had been the exception to every rule. They met in high school when he sat beside her in art class, all messy hair and constant questions about everything. He made her laugh when grief still felt heavy. He walked her home through rain and snow, bought her coffee when she forgot her wallet, and never once made her feel like she owed him anything in return. He was safety in human form. Owen never talked much about his family. She knew his parents had died when he was young, that he and his older brother had different last names because of complicated adoptions and legal guardians. Owen worked as a journalist for a small independent paper, chasing stories about local politics and community issues. He lived simply, just like her. The idea that his brother was someone important, someone powerful, never crossed her mind. Her father, Robert Bennett, was a gentleman who had worked as an accountant for 30 years. After her mother left, he became both parents, learning to braid hair and pack lunches and show up to every school event even when exhaustion made his steps slow. He took a job 5 years ago with a private investment firm because the money was good and Sophia needed college tuition. He never explained the details, just said it was temporary work for people who valued privacy. The first letter arrived on a Tuesday morning. Federal investigation. Asset seizure. Compliance review. Words that sounded like a foreign language. Her father sat at their kitchen table with his reading glasses sliding down his nose, trying to explain something he clearly did not understand himself. Sophia wanted to believe him when he said everything would be fine, but the tremor in his voice told a different story. 2 months later, federal agents came to their apartment building at dawn. Sophia watched from her window as they led her father away in handcuffs while neighbors whispered behind curtains. The news called him a conspirator in a massive fraud scheme. They used words like embezzlement and money laundering. They showed his photograph next to criminals in expensive suits. Her gentle father who sang old songs while cooking dinner was suddenly a stranger on television. Owen found her that afternoon sitting on the floor of her apartment, surrounded by legal documents she could not read through her tears. He held her while she cried, then made tea she did not drink, and finally said the words that would change everything. "My brother can help." Sophia had heard the name Damian Rivers only once or twice, always in passing. Owen mentioned him the way people mention distant relatives they rarely see. But when Owen made the phone call, his voice changed. It became smaller, more formal, like he was speaking to someone who lived in a different atmosphere. 3 days later, a black car arrived outside the bookstore where Sophia worked. The driver knew her name. He opened the door and told her Mr. Rivers was expecting her. Owen sat in the back seat looking pale and worried. He reached for her hand as they crossed the bridge into Manhattan, but his palm was cold with sweat. The building rose above the city like a blade of black glass. Inside, everything was marble and silence. The elevator climbed so high Sophia's ears popped. Owen stopped at a set of doors with no handles and turned to her with eyes full of apology. "Whatever he asks, just listen. Please." Then the doors opened and Owen stayed behind. The office was more window than room. The city sprawled below like a living map of light and shadow. Behind a desk of polished black stone stood a man who looked like he had been carved from the same material. Damian Rivers was tall and perfectly still, wearing a suit that probably cost more than her entire wardrobe. His dark hair was swept back from a face that showed no emotion. His eyes were the cold gray of winter storms. He did not greet her. He simply gestured to a chair and waited until she sat before speaking. Your father will be sentenced in 6 weeks. The prosecution has enough evidence to guarantee 15 years in federal prison. There are no appeals that will succeed. No lawyers who can change this outcome. Sophia felt the air leave her lungs. She tried to speak but her throat closed around the words. Damien continued in that same calm, detached voice. I can make this disappear. I have the resources and the connections to redirect the investigation toward the actual architects of the fraud. Your father was a tool, not a mastermind. With the right pressure in the right places, he walks away with probation and community service. Hope surged so violently in her chest it hurt. She leaned forward, her hands gripping the edge of his desk. Please. Whatever it costs, I will pay it. I will work, I will sell everything I have. Damien's expression did not change. I do not need your money, Miss Bennet. I need your time and your cooperation. He reached into a drawer and withdrew a small black box. When he opened it, a diamond ring caught the city lights and scattered them like broken stars. The stone was enormous, flawless, and absolutely terrifying. You will be my fiancée for 1 year. You will live where I tell you, appear at events I designate, and present yourself as a woman who chose this arrangement willingly. You will convince the world that you are in love with me. Sophia stared at the ring, then at him, trying to understand. Why? Because I need someone the press cannot corrupt or connect to my business dealings. Someone innocent. Someone believable. You fit the requirements. His words were surgical, each one cutting away another piece of her dignity. And if I refuse? Then your father serves his full sentence. 15 years. He will be 68 when he is released, if he survives incarceration at all. The cruelty of it stole her breath. This was not a negotiation. It was a trap dressed in diamonds and expensive suits. Sophia thought of her father's hands shaking as he tried to read legal papers. She thought of him alone in a cell, confused and afraid. She thought of all the years he sacrificed for her after her mother abandoned them both. The choice was not really a choice at all. Her voice came out broken and small. 1 year? 1 year. After that, we stage a quiet separation and you return to your life. Your father stays free. You walk away with enough money to start over anywhere you want. What about Owen? Damien's jaw tightened, the first crack in his perfect composure. My brother does not make decisions in my world. This arrangement is between you and me. Sophia closed her eyes and saw her father's face. When she opened them again, Damien was holding out a pen and a contract she had not noticed before. The pages were dense with legal language she could not focus on. At the bottom was a line for her signature. Her hand shook so badly she almost could not write her name. The pen scratched across paper and the sound felt like the ending of something precious. When she finished, Damien took the contract and slid the ring across the desk toward her. Put it on. The band was cold and heavy. It fit perfectly, which somehow made everything worse. He had known her ring size. He had planned this down to the smallest detail. You will move into my residence tomorrow. A stylist will provide appropriate clothing. You will attend your first event with me on Saturday. Any questions you have can be directed to my assistant. Sophia stood on legs that felt like water. She wanted to scream, to throw the ring at his perfect face, to run back to her small safe life. Instead, she turned toward the door because survival required obedience now. His voice stopped her before she reached the exit. Miss Bennet. She looked back. For just a moment, something flickered in his cold eyes. Something that might have been regret or recognition that he had just purchased a human life like it was another asset in his portfolio. This is not personal. It is simply necessary. Sophia wanted to tell him that necessity built on someone else's suffering was still cruelty. But she had no power here, no voice that mattered. So she left without speaking and stepped into the elevator that would carry her back down to earth. Owen waited in the lobby, his face full of questions he was afraid to ask. Sophia showed him her hand. The diamond caught the light and he flinched as if she had struck him. "I am sorry. I did not know he would do this. I thought he would just pay for lawyers or use his connections quietly." Sophia touched his cheek gently because Owen was still her friend, still the boy who walked her home and made her feel safe even when the world was cruel. "It is not your fault. I made the choice." But they both knew that was a lie. There had been no choice, only the illusion of one. Outside, the city moved through its ordinary evening. People rushed to catch trains and hailed taxis and laughed into their phones. Sophia stood on the sidewalk wearing a ring that weighed more than freedom and feeling like she had just traded her future for her father's past. Tomorrow she would move into a stranger's home and become someone she did not recognize. Tonight, she would go back to her small apartment one last time and try to remember what it felt like to belong to herself. The penthouse occupied the entire top floor of the tower, and stepping into it felt like entering a museum where someone had forgotten to install warmth. Everything was glass, steel, and carefully chosen art that probably cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. Floor-to-ceiling windows displayed the city like a painting that never stopped moving. Sophia stood in the entrance holding her single suitcase, feeling impossibly small. A woman in a sharp gray suit appeared from somewhere deeper in the apartment. Her name was Victoria, and she was Damien's executive assistant. She spoke in the same efficient, emotionless tone as her employer, explaining schedules and expectations as if reading from a script she had memorized long ago. "Your bedroom is the second door on the left. Mr. Rivers occupies the master suite on the opposite side. You will not enter his private spaces without permission. Meals are prepared by the chef and served at 7 in the morning and 8 in the evening. Mr. Rivers expects punctuality." Sophia's room was larger than her entire previous apartment. The bed was enormous, covered in white linens that looked like they had never been touched by human hands. A walk-in closet held rows of designer clothes in her exact size, dresses and shoes and accessories she would never have chosen for herself. Everything was beautiful and impersonal, like a hotel room for someone else's life. That first night, she sat on the edge of the bed and called her father. His voice cracked with relief when he answered from the temporary housing the court had allowed while awaiting sentencing. She told him she had found help, that everything would be okay, and left out every true detail. He cried and thanked God and told her he loved her. When she hung up, Sophia stared at the diamond on her finger and wondered if love could survive being bought and sold. Damien worked constantly. He left before dawn and returned after dark, moving through the penthouse like a ghost who barely acknowledged her presence. They ate breakfast in silence, him reading financial reports on a tablet while she pushed food around her plate. He asked no questions about her life, her dreams, or her thoughts. She was furniture that happened to breathe. The first public event came faster than she was ready for. Victoria arrived with a team of stylists who transformed her into someone glossy and polished. They chose a midnight blue gown that clung to her body in ways that made her feel exposed. They styled her hair into elegant waves and painted her face until she looked like the women in magazines she used to flip through while waiting at the dentist. When Damien saw her, he paused. It was barely a hesitation, just a fraction of a second where his eyes traveled from her face to her feet and back again. Then he nodded once, as if she had passed some inspection, and offered his arm. "Remember to smile. Appear interested in whatever boring conversation happens around you. Do not discuss your father, your past, or anything personal. You are simply a woman who fell in love with me at a charity gala 3 months ago." The lie tasted bitter, but she swallowed it anyway. The event was held at a museum that had been closed to the public for a private fundraiser. Everyone wore clothes that cost more than cars and spoke in voices carefully modulated to sound casual about wealth that could end hunger in small countries. Sophia's hand rested in the crook of Damien's arm while he introduced her to people whose names she immediately forgot. She smiled until her face hurt and said very little because silence seemed safer than speech. A woman in diamonds that could cut glass looked at Sophia's ring and made a sound of approval. How did he propose? It must have been terribly romantic. Sophia's mind went blank. She had not prepared a story. Damien's hand tightened slightly on her waist, a warning or maybe a prompt. He took me to the place where we first met and asked me under the stars. It was simple and perfect. The woman sighed as if this was the most beautiful thing she had ever heard. Damien's expression remained neutral, but something shifted in his posture, a subtle relaxation that suggested approval. Later, in the car ride home, he spoke without looking at her. "You did well tonight. Better than I expected." It was the closest thing to praise she had received from him. Sophia stared out the window at the city rushing past and said nothing at all. Weeks blurred together in a pattern of forced performances. They attended dinners where people discussed mergers and acquisitions like they were planning weekend trips. They went to gallery openings where art was an investment strategy rather than beauty. They posed for photographs that appeared in society pages, Damien's hand always possessively placed at her lower back, her smile growing more practiced with each flash. Owen called sometimes, his voice tight with guilt. He asked how she was managing and she lied easily because the truth felt too heavy to share. She missed their old friendship, the easy conversations over cheap coffee and the way he used to make her laugh about nothing in particular. That version of their relationship felt like it belonged to someone else now. In private, Damien remained distant. He worked late into the night in his home office, the glow of computer screens lighting his face in shades of blue. Sometimes Sophia would wake at 3 a.m. and see light beneath his door, hear the quiet murmur of his voice on phone calls with people in different time zones. She wondered if he ever slept or if rest was another weakness he had trained himself to eliminate. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, small things began to change. One morning she found a new camera on the kitchen counter, professional grade with lenses she had only dreamed of owning. No note, no explanation. When she asked Victoria about it, the assistant simply said, "Mr. Rivers noticed you looking at photography equipment online." Another evening, she discovered her favorite tea in the cupboard, the specific brand she always bought at the small shop near her old apartment. It was a detail so minor it should not have mattered, yet it felt significant in a world where nothing else was chosen for her comfort. The first real conversation happened on a night when Damien came home earlier than usual. Sophia was sitting by the window with her camera, photographing the way light fell across the city at dusk. He poured himself a drink and stood watching her work with an expression she could not read. "Why photography?" His question surprised her. She lowered the camera and considered lying, giving some surface answer that required nothing real. But something about the hour and the quiet made her honest. Because cameras capture truth. People forget to pretend when they do not think anyone is watching. I like finding those moments. Damien was silent for a long time. Then he moved to stand beside her at the window, looking out at the same view. "I have spent my entire adult life making sure no one ever sees those moments in me." It was the first personal thing he had ever shared. Sophia looked at his reflection in the glass, the hard lines of his face softened slightly by the fading light. Why? Because vulnerability is a weapon other people use against you. My mother trusted the wrong people with her truth and it destroyed her. I decided I would never make that mistake. The pain in his voice was carefully controlled but unmistakable. Sophia understood then that his coldness was not cruelty but armor, protection built from old wounds that never properly healed. "I am sorry about your mother." Damien finished his drink and set the glass down with precise care. "Everyone is sorry. Sorry changes nothing." He left the room but the conversation lingered like smoke. For the first time, Sophia saw past the billionaire and the calculated control to the person underneath, someone who had learned to survive by never letting anyone close enough to hurt him again. After that night, things shifted in ways too subtle for others to notice but impossible for Sophia to ignore. Damien asked about her day sometimes. He listened when she talked about photographs she wanted to take. He stopped treating meals like business meetings and occasionally shared stories about Owen as a child, memories that made him almost smile. They attended a gala for a children's hospital where Damien gave a speech about his foundation's work. Sophia watched him command the room with words about hope and second chances, and saw genuine emotion flicker across his face when he talked about kids who needed help. After the event, in the car, she touched his hand without thinking. "That was beautiful. What you said about giving children better futures." Damien looked at their joined hands as if trying to solve a complex equation. He did not pull away. "My mother believed every child deserved a chance regardless of their circumstances. The foundation is her legacy, the only part of her the world did not destroy." Sophia squeezed his fingers gently. "She would be proud of what you have built." Something in his expression cracked then, just for a moment. He turned his hand over and laced their fingers together properly, palm against palm. They stayed like that for the rest of the drive, not speaking but no longer alone in their separate silences. The shift was gradual but undeniable. Damien started coming home earlier. They began having dinner together without tablets or phones, talking about everything except the arrangement that brought them together. He laughed once at something she said, a real laugh that transformed his entire face into something younger and less guarded. Sophia felt her carefully maintained walls beginning to crumble. She knew it was dangerous. She knew falling for him was the worst possible choice. He had bought her presence, negotiated her time like a business deal. But knowing something intellectually and feeling it emotionally were completely different things. Her heart was becoming involved despite every logical reason to protect it. One night, they stood together on the balcony looking at stars that struggled to shine through city light pollution. Damien's shoulder brushed hers and neither of them moved away. "When this year ends, what will you do?" His question felt heavier than it should. Sophia considered the future she had planned before everything changed, the photography career and the small apartment and the simple life. It all seemed faded now, like a photograph left too long in sunlight. "I do not know anymore. Everything feels different now." Damien turned to look at her directly, his gray eyes reflecting the distant stars. "Different how?" Sophia wanted to tell him the truth. That she was falling in love with a man who had purchased her like property. That the arrangement that started as imprisonment was beginning to feel like something else entirely. That she was terrified of the day when the contract ended and she would have to walk away from whatever this was becoming. But before she could answer, his phone rang with the harsh tone reserved for emergencies. He answered and his expression turned to stone as someone delivered news that required his immediate attention. Within minutes he was gone, back to his office, back to the world of numbers and power that always claimed him eventually. Sophia stayed on the balcony alone, the almost confession still caught in her throat. The city spread below, millions of lives moving through their own complicated stories. She touched the ring on her finger and wondered if something bought could ever transform into something real, or if she was simply a girl foolish enough to fall in love with her own cage. The scandal broke on a Tuesday morning while Sophia was photographing frost patterns on the penthouse windows. Her phone exploded with notifications, messages from numbers she did not recognize and news alerts that made her stomach drop. Someone had leaked details about her arrangement with Damien. Not everything, but enough. The headlines screamed about contractual relationships and business deals disguised as romance. Her photograph appeared next to articles that questioned everything. Damien was in London for meetings. When he called, his voice was colder than she had heard in months, the careful warmth they had built together frozen solid by crisis. "Do not leave the apartment. Do not speak to anyone from the press. Victoria will handle statements." But he did not ask if she was okay. He did not apologize for the exposure or the invasion. He simply issued orders and ended the call, back to being the man who saw her as a problem to be managed rather than a person to protect. Victoria arrived within the hour, her expression grim. The leak had come from someone inside Damien's business circle, a competitor named Julian Cross who had been trying to damage his reputation for years. The story was carefully crafted to make Damien look manipulative and Sophia appear either complicit or victimized, depending on which version sold more papers. Owen showed up at the door despite security trying to stop him. His face was stricken with guilt and anger. He pulled Sophia into a hug that felt like the only real thing in a world that had turned liquid and unstable. I should never have brought you into this. I thought he would help, not use you. Sophia wanted to defend Damien, to explain that things had become more complicated than simple use. But the words stuck because she was not entirely sure herself what they had become. The arrangement was still real. The contract still existed. And Damien's first response to crisis had been control, not care. The press camped outside the building. Photographers with long lenses tried to catch her image through windows. Social media dissected her life, strangers analyzing her background and speculating about her motives. Some called her a gold digger. Others painted her as a victim. None of them knew the truth, which was messier and more human than any narrative they constructed. Damien returned 3 days later looking exhausted in ways that went beyond lack of sleep. He found Sophia in her room, staring at her packed suitcase. She had decided to leave, to end the arrangement early and face whatever consequences came. Staying felt like slowly drowning in something she could not name. He stood in the doorway, his suit wrinkled for the first time since she had known him. You are leaving. It was not a question. Sophia turned to face him, trying to keep her voice steady. This was supposed to be simple. A business arrangement with clear terms. But it has become something else and I cannot do this anymore. What has it become? His question was quiet, almost vulnerable. Sophia felt tears burning behind her eyes but refused to let them fall. You know what it has become. At least I think you do. But every time something goes wrong, you retreat back into being the man who bought me. I cannot love someone who sees me as property. The word love hung between them like broken glass. Damien's expression shifted through emotions too quick to name before settling into something raw and unguarded. I have spent 15 years making sure I never needed anyone. Needing people gives them power to destroy you. My mother needed people and they destroyed her so completely she could not survive it. I promised myself I would never be that vulnerable. He moved further into the room, each step careful as if approaching something fragile. Then you appeared in my office, terrified and brave, willing to sacrifice yourself for your father. And I told myself it was just business, just another transaction. But you kept being kind when you had every reason to hate me. You kept seeing good in a world I had decided was only corruption and calculation. You made me remember that feeling things is not weakness. Sophia's breath caught. Damien was standing close now, close enough that she could see exhaustion and fear and something that looked dangerously like hope in his eyes. I do not know how to do this. I do not know how to love someone without trying to control everything. But I know that the thought of you leaving feels like losing the only honest thing in my entire constructed life. So I am asking you to stay, not because of contracts or arrangements, but because I need you in ways I do not have language for yet. It was the most words he had ever given her at once, every sentence costing him something. Sophia reached up and touched his face, feeling the rough stubble and the tension in his jaw. I need you to let me be your partner, not your possession. I need you to trust that I will not destroy you if you let me see all the broken parts. Damien closed his eyes and leaned into her touch like a man learning what comfort felt like. The broken parts are all that is left. I am not sure there is anything else. Then let me see them anyway. He kissed her then, soft and desperate, like a question he did not know how to ask any other way. Sophia kissed him back and felt something fundamental shift between them, the careful distance collapsing into proximity that was terrifying and necessary. When they broke apart, both were trembling. The scandal continued for weeks. Damien gave a single interview where he stated that their relationship had begun as an arrangement but had become genuine, that he had made mistakes but was learning. He did not apologize for protecting her father because he would not pretend that was wrong. The public response was mixed, but gradually the story lost its heat, replaced by newer scandals and fresh outrage. Julian Cross tried one more attack, this time targeting Sophia directly. He sent people to dig through her past, looking for anything scandalous. When they found nothing, he manufactured rumors instead. Sophia was preparing to do a legal interview to defend herself when Damien stopped her. "Let me handle this. Not because you cannot fight your own battles, but because I have resources you do not, and I will not let him hurt you to get to me." Within 48 hours, Julian's own financial irregularities became very public. Damien never confirmed his involvement, but Sophia knew. It was his way of protecting her, using his power not to control but to shield. The difference mattered. Her father was officially cleared of all major charges, sentenced to community service and probation just as Damien had promised. When Sophia took him to lunch at a small diner near their old neighborhood, he held her hand and cried grateful tears. She told him the truth then, about the arrangement and how it had changed. He looked at her with understanding born from his own mistakes. Love that grows from difficult places is still love, Emmy. Maybe it is even stronger because it had to fight to exist. Owen struggled with the situation. He loved his brother but could not fully forgive how things began. His friendship with Sophia stayed intact but shifted, becoming something more careful. They met for coffee sometimes and talked about easier things, both knowing that some distances could not be fully crossed again. It was sad and necessary, the price of choices that changed everything. The contract expired on a cold March evening. Sophia stood in the penthouse holding the papers while Damien waited across the room. Legally, she was free to leave. The agreement was complete. "What do you want to do?" Damien's question was simple but enormous. Sophia looked at the ring on her finger, no longer a symbol of purchase but something chosen. She crossed the room and placed the contract in his hands. "I want to tear this up and start over. I want to stay because I choose you, not because any paper says I should. I want us to figure out what this looks like when it is real." Damien took the contract and walked to the fireplace. He held it over the flames and let it catch, watching paper curl and blacken into ash. When he turned back, his smile was genuine and unguarded, the expression of a man who had finally stopped running from the thing he needed most. "Then stay. Not as my fiancée or my arrangement or my obligation. Stay as the woman I love, who taught me that vulnerability is not weakness and that being seen completely is not the same as being destroyed." Sophia went to him and they stood together while the last pieces of the contract burned away. Outside, the city continued its endless movement, millions of stories unfolding in the dark. But inside that room, two people who had started as a transaction were becoming something real, something built on choice and trust and the terrifying beautiful act of letting someone else past all the carefully constructed walls. 3 months later, Damien proposed again. Not in an office with contracts and ultimatums, but on a quiet beach at dawn where Sophia was photographing the light. He knelt in the sand and offered a different ring, simpler and chosen together. When she said yes, it was not because her father's freedom depended on it or because obligation demanded it. It was because love, real love, was worth the risk of every broken thing that came before. They married small and private, just family and a few close friends. Owen stood as best man and smiled despite complicated feelings, because he loved them both enough to want their happiness. Her father walked her down an aisle of scattered flowers and whispered that her mother would have been proud of the woman she had become. The life they built was not perfect. Damien still worked too much and struggled with needing her. Sophia still had moments of doubt, wondering if foundations built on transactions could ever be fully trusted. But they learned together, stumbling through the messy human work of loving someone completely. And on quiet evenings when they stood together watching the city lights, both knew they had found something rare. Something that started in darkness and fought its way toward light. Something that proved love could grow even in the most unlikely soil, as long as two people were brave enough to tend it.